Our second scripture this morning is from the book of Acts. It's the story of Dorcas, also called Tabitha. And perhaps because Luke, as the writer of Acts, did not have a paid copy editor, I want you to know that he uses both names all the way through the story. So don't let it confuse you. Tabitha and Dorcas are the same person. Listen for the living word of the Lord for you this day. In Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas. She was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time, she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa. So when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, "Please come at once." Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room, and then he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, "Tabitha, get up." She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called for the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Who taught you to give? Her name was Luella Langenberg. She was 89 pounds soaking wet and stretched to maybe 5'2" or 5'3". And every time you saw her, she wore brown or taupe polyester pants with a button-up blouse and an off-white cardigan sweater. She stopped coming to church every Sunday when the Nebraska wind blew her over one day as she was trying to get from her car into the door of the church. And her doctor very firmly told her that unless she was willing to sit in a wheelchair where they could buckle her in, she was going to fall and break a hip, and then she was really going to be pinned down. So she capitulated. But until her capitulation, Luella was ever present, ever gentle, ever willing, ever speaking to everyone. And she loved church music. She even loved the organ when the organist played hymns like A Funeral Dirge for a Snail. She loved the children's voices. She loved the handbell choirs. She loved the piano, the organ, and any and every special music event that was ever held at the church. But Luella was never an elder. She was never the chair of a committee. She was never one to make an announcement or start a group project or speak her opinion in a congregational meeting. She was just Luella. She was a quiet, reserved widow for some 30 years when I knew her. Perhaps she could have used one of those new frocks that Dorcas made for the other widows. And she was a person that everyone assumed had limited means. And then she died at 90-something and left the church $1.5 million with which to endow the music ministry. Because you see, Luella and her husband had bought Walmart stock at its inception, and it was sold after she died. She left an impact on that community that brought life and surprised everybody. No one ever imagined because, well, it was Luella. And she taught me to give, especially of herself. That money just reflected her lifelong generosity of presence. That was her real gift. His name was Mr. Tyler. Mr. Tyler was the janitor at the middle school, which was my new school for 6th grade. Now, all the Catholic students in town who had started their education at the Catholic school, at the Catholic church, entered the public schools in 6th grade. And that year, all of the black students from literally across the tracks in my small southern town where the school was located were now in school with us. We were in school with them because our little town had finally complied with the 1964 civil rights legislation. And, it was only 6 years late, but there we were. Mr. Tyler walked the halls with a broom or a mop, usually a bucket. He was called to clean up the hot dog that Leo inevitably barfed on hot dog day at the cafeteria. And on that first day of school, at the end of the day, as I walked past him in the hall, he called me by name. And he told me that he hoped I had had a good first day. I think I just looked at him. I don't even think anything came out of my mouth. But I went straight home. I was so freaked out. And I asked my mother, why did that strange man know my name? And she said, well, he's part of your church. He's been there longer than you have. He's known you since you were born. Oh. Mr. Tyler taught me how to give. He gave me myself. I was somebody in his eyes, which was a big deal for a 6th grader, let me tell you. Her nickname was Honey, because she didn't like her real name very much. And she was my beloved grandmother. And she was smart and strong and in charge of her own life at a time that women did not often have that opportunity. She would tell you she was only a school teacher, but as we all know, school teachers are one of the most life-changing professions in our world. She taught me to give. She gave me strength and intelligence that I inherited from her and the ability to see other gifts that were particularly mine. My grandmother nurtured generations of smart young women who were either lucky enough to claim her as family or who learned from her on a Navajo reservation in Arizona, an Inuit town in Alaska, or a tiny rural schoolhouse in central Arkansas. Who taught you to give? Dorcas taught her community to give. She was significant enough to warrant a story in the biblical text, but she got sandwiched between Paul's conversion in Acts and Peter and Cornelius and the inclusion of the Gentiles. And if you take both of those really big stories that we hear all the time, plus the focus on male discipleship that so indoctrinates us, this little tiny brief story of literally a, quote, woman disciple gets overlooked. But that word that means woman disciple is only used right there in the New Testament text, nowhere else. And it indicates her honored place in that community. Her life overflowed with good works, the story tells us. So Luke gives us just enough hints, just enough clues to know that she was likely a powerful person in her community, a graceful, generous woman. Her name means gazelle in both languages. She's often said to be wealthy, but there's really no indication of that. other than she makes these clothes, but I wonder if perhaps she was so loved and respected by her community that she was easily provided the resources she needed to share her gifts from those communities we read about in Acts that shared all things together to do God's work. And I think the biggest point there is she wasn't generous because she was wealthy. So when Peter arrived from Joppa, the community was grieving. They were shocked at her death, and they were speaking with great passion about all the things that she had done for them. As a Jewish community, they had already shown her their greatest respect as they washed her body and said the prayers that sent her off. And they told stories of Dorcas's generosity and love. And when Peter arrived, they took him straight upstairs to show him Dorcas and tell him all of the stories about all of the life that she had shared with them. They showed him the garments. And that was a big deal. We forget that in the ancient world, a piece of clothing was extraordinarily valuable. You had to raise the plant or the animal from which the fibers came. You had to harvest the fibers. You had to spin those fibers into thread. And then you had to weave the thread into fabric before you finally stitched the garment by hand, every stitch. And a piece of clothing could mean the difference between life and death. Who teaches us to give? The Lord our shepherd, who first gives us everything we need in life, in the valley of death, in the presence of our foes. God's care pursues us all the days of our lives. And much of the giving that truly brings life into the world is like the giving of Dorcas. It's quiet, it's hidden, and it's often eclipsed by bigger stories, bigger events. But it's never more life-giving, and it's never more significant. That bringing of life, that giving of all the things that we need is reflected in the 23rd Psalm, where we receive not great temples, not wealthy homes, not servants, but the daily needs of life and the breath and the nurture that makes that life worth living. Who is giving and what is giving in this story? The life with which Dorcas gifted her community radiated through that room. I think it radiates through the text if you look at the story itself. And I am not at all sure why Peter asked the community to leave the room. But my sense in reading the story is that resurrection life was already in that room. Poor old Peter, maybe he just literally didn't know what else to do, right? Everybody's looking at him. Maybe he just needed to take a breath. After Peter prayed, he seemed to enact the reality of resurrection even before it was real. We don't hear that Dorcas was alive when Peter turned, the story says, to the body and said, "Tabitha, get up." It was then she opened her eyes and saw Peter and sat up. The Spirit is certainly at work giving a visible sign of resurrection life to this community and to our community as we read this story and consider it. But I don't think that is the ultimate gift here. Helping her up, Peter called her into the room, and God's holy people, including the widows, were presented with life. I'm not sure the gift of the Spirit that day had anything to do with a walking, talking, breathing body. What really came alive that day was a new kind of community. A holy people, holy means set apart to do God's work. Dorcas was no longer the one in the community that was giving to others. The whole community became elevated, made holy, as they gave themselves with work in and for their communities, and an inclusion of every single person in that work, including the widows. And the story makes a particular point of saying Peter called the widows in, because typically they would have been excluded in the work and the witness of the community. And I think that's why the news spread. I think that's the gift of God's Spirit to God's holy people. And so today it's our turn to teach the giving that we have received.